First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to join us this morning. Mike Schweitzer will be walking you through the presentation this morning. Mike Schweitzer is the practice lead with our Enterprise Content Management division within Habanero. So Mike, we'll turn the broadcast over to you.
Thanks, Scott. Welcome, everybody. So today we're going to talk about our records management QuickStart that we've come with here at Habanero Consulting Group. This will be about a 25-minute presentation. We're going to try and leave about 5 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. On the agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about Habanero if you haven't met us yet. We're going to talk about why we went through the effort to create this program of records management QuickStart at Habanero. We're going to dive into the QuickStart and talk about it and what it entails, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So that's me. I'm the Practice Lead for Enterprise Content Management here at Habanero Consulting Group. I'm also a Collabware MVP, so I've got about 15 Collabware projects under my belt over the past couple of years, and I've been recognized as being one of their top partners. A little bit about Habanero. We're essentially a Microsoft services shop, primarily focused on SharePoint, but we have a large offering. We're located across Canada in Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto. We're super passionate about helping companies and organizations thrive, and be also something that we live in currently as well. So we're super proud to be one of the #1 top employers in Canada according to the Globe and Mail for this year. So why do we create the Records Management QuickStart? So we know that oftentimes records management initiatives fail, and it doesn't take a whole lot of research on the web to find a bunch of stats as to the number of projects that are unsuccessful in the domain of records management. There's lots out there. We also know that a lot of the people that we talk to, a lot of companies, organizations that we're in talks with, they spend a lot of time deciding on which platform to go with, or even how to kind of kick off their program of work. And then when they do get into that program of work, sometimes it can take a couple of years to really get the project off the ground before they go live and actually reaping the benefits of a records management program. So as a result, we often hear that records management is important, but we're not quite sure how to get started. We often hear that maybe you might be a little bit overwhelmed to the complexity of a large ECM project. And oftentimes we find that people kind of push it off till next year. So something that they know is important, they're kind of a little bit overwhelming, and they're going to leave it for a future time. It's a little bit too much to take on at the current moment. I think fundamentally we believe that user experience drives adoption, and that ultimately that adoption of the platform is what drives compliance. If you've probably all heard of records management systems out there that are big, expensive systems that get deployed, but ultimately don't get adopted. And fundamentally that's probably because there's too much friction in the system. We also believe that the earlier that you get a handle on your records, the easier it's going to be. There's all kinds of stats coming out now from AIM and ARMA about the amount of content and how fast it grows within organizations. And so the earlier that you can get a handle on your compliance, the less overall work it'll be in the long run. Ultimately, we also notice it's kind of hard to understand how everything fits together until you've really been through the process. And so this is kind of a big rationale for the QuickStart, to really be able to jump into it and get your hands on one scenario within records management to get a better understanding of what it looks like. So ultimately, at some point, in this domain of records management, you just kind of dive into it, jump into it, and start to do some records management in your enterprise. And with this approach, you're going to be free to kind of iterate, refine, and adapt over time. So if you're taking it a bit more of a piecemeal approach, you want to be open to the fact that you might not get it completely right the first time. You want to learn from your iterations and refine your approach over time. So what is the records management QuickStart that we come up with? It's a 4 to 6 week, really focused exercise. And we've chosen Collabware to add to SharePoint, but I think the methodology can be applied to most platforms out there. And it's just really a thoughtful first step in the journey of ECM towards compliance, all the while trying to minimize your risk for such a deployment. The outcomes from a tactical sense are, when we do them, we're going to have Collabware installed and running. We're going to have your initial configuration of the system done. Your team will be trained up on the technology and best practices. You'll have some kind of end-to-end meaningful scenario, whether that's projects or policies or contracts, and you'll have this end-to-end solution of collaboration and compliance. Ultimately, you'll have started managing records in your organization, and we also want to make sure that we have reporting in the back end to look at the metrics and success of the system going forward. More importantly, this QuickStart really gives you a good understanding of the implementation process. This is what a lot of people have a hard time really wrapping their head around, is what does this actually look like to roll out a large-scale ECM project to an organization. And so going through a QuickStart and really doing one deployment and a focused effort will give you a really good handle of what that process is like. It'll give you a really good understanding of the technology, its limitations, how it fits into the organization, as well as efforts. So our methodology is as follows. The first thing we want to do is prep SharePoint. Frankly, when we talk about prepping SharePoint, this methodology approach will work on existing SharePoint sites. I think the methodology in general will work for any kind of platform that you have for folks in ECM. If you are starting from scratch, you want to keep your portals separate and purposeful, and we'll talk about that in a second here. And really, not to be too generic, but the more detailed you are, the better. So if you have a SharePoint environment and you've been thoughtful about the types of content that you have and the metadata around that content, so if you have contracts, if you're capturing the vendor name and stuff like that, the overall compliance piece will be easier. When we talk about, if you are starting from scratch, we talk about keeping your portals purposeful. So the first concept is this collaboration portal. So this departmental collaboration site where departments may go to work as a team and collaborate and do document management. Behind that is going to be your archives. So you're going to have a place where content can go and live out its useful life according to the file plan, but it may not be necessary to have front and center for most end users. So the idea could be of a contract, and for the first 2 years of that contract, it's going to be beneficial to have that in the collaboration portal, but after 2 years, you can probably send it off to the archives for long-term storage. And then we'll want to have an employee portal. And the employee portal is really that employee-centric, employee-focused employee portal to surface that content up to end users in a meaningful way. And it's really meant to more drive culture in your organization and to give them the content that they need. Part of this idea here is that end users shouldn't have to know to go to the HR departmental site and drill down several layers to find those policies or procedures that they need. They get surfaced up in the employee portal in a much more meaningful fashion. So from a high-level standpoint, we have this nice separation of these different purposed portals that you want to create in your organization. There's a lot of benefit here. So, for example, if you decide that your employee portal, if you want to change technologies, if you want to move your employee portal to the cloud away from on-prem SharePoint, you'll have a little bit more flexibility. If you want to throw in a different technology, you can do that without affecting your collaboration portal. I find a lot of organizations often mesh the employee portal and the collaboration portal together, and it tends to complicate things a little bit too much. So the next step is once you know basically what your SharePoint environment looks like, or at least in what direction you want to take it, we'll want to install Collabware. Collabware is just a SharePoint site. Collabware is really an extension to SharePoint. When you go to the Collabware web application, it'll look very much like SharePoint. Right out of the bat, you'll have your audit trails and all the basic functionality like a file plan editor and stuff like that. Once we have Collabware installed, we'll want to import your file plan if you have one. It's okay if you don't. Most companies that we work with will have a file plan in an Excel format that we can take into an XML-based format that Collabware understands. And after we import that file plan, you'll have a basic functioning ECM platform within SharePoint. So the idea is that at this point, you could potentially go to any document library, upload a document, manually select record category, manually hit declare record, and manage the retention of that content going forward. Ultimately, end users won't manually select categories and typically won't manually declare records. So the rest of the QuickStart is really about showing you how to create those amazing solutions for end users and have that end-to-end scenario where end users aren't even actually doing records management, they're simply focusing on collaboration and these business outcome focused solutions that ultimately drive adoption. And in the back end, we're maintaining compliance. So the next key part of the QuickStart would be to do training on the platform. So training is pretty critical to get everyone as much as the team involved as possible. Typically, we advocate having both your records management team and IT in the training together. Ultimately, out of the training, you're going to want to have a good understanding of how the system will actually work in real-world scenarios. And oftentimes, this may it'll support your major decisions and strategies going forward with an all-VCM solution. So you may, in fact, after going through the training and see what Collabware is capable of and how it works with SharePoint, you may go back in and rework people's accountabilities. You may figure out a different approach. You may go and refactor your file plan. So you really understand the software, what it's capable of, and what its limitations are, will be really important. The next piece is out of the past couple of years and our focus in ECM, we've come out with these strategies around records management. We call them the 6 pillars of ECM. And the idea is there's a lot of stuff that you have to work out before you engage with a department or before you create a solution in SharePoint and that end-to-end compliance and collaboration. And so the key ones that we've come up with would be records management or applied records management, search, content migration, security, change management, and governance. And so we have a bunch of best practices and solutions that work for these different areas. But to give you one example, the stuff that you need to think about in your 6 pillars would be, take one example, migration. Well, how far back are we migrating? Are we migrating back, if you're migrating from network file storage, are we only going to migrate back 2 years? Are we only going to migrate back 1 year? Depending on that decision may change what you're searching, because if you're going to migrate everything over, then you don't need to search network file storage. What sources are you migrating from? Are we going to migrate in our physical files? Are we going to migrate in from older versions of SharePoint or other systems? Ultimately, these programs of work can be a year or 2 long. So you'll probably have a migration champion who's going to own migration going forward, and then figure out what to do with any unmigrated content. So oftentimes, it's cost prohibitive to migrate all of your content into the new system. Sometimes you want to go back a meaningful year or 2 to get the content that people really need and would use on a daily basis. And then you want to have that network file storage locked down and dealt with in some manner. So it's really important to figure out what your approach is for these 6 pillars of ECM before you hit that first department or that first solution, because if you don't have that figured out, and again, migration as an example, if you don't know what tool you're going to use for migration, or even if you're going to use a tool, you don't want to have to stop halfway through a department and go figure out and take 2 or 3 weeks to figure out what tool you would use. So important to work through all those. So at this point, we kind of know what SharePoint environment should look like, and it should be headed in that direction. We've installed Collabware CLM, we've imported your file plan, and we have a basic ECM platform where people can go into any library and put the document into a category and start to maintain compliance. We would have trained you on the Collabware platform, as well as gone through all of the 6 pillars of ECM and gone through best practices and shared with you kind of what works in those different areas. And we're really at the point now where we can go through and create a solution. And the idea would be that in the QuickStart is to pick a really meaningful solution that people understand, whether it's employee files or contracts or policies. Maybe it's a small function within a department, or maybe it's a small department. But go and pick a meaningful solution that we can really dig our teeth into and tackle that. End of the day, it's really all about creating a user-focused solution, and when you think about these types of projects, I'd say probably 80% of the effort really goes into creating that collaboration solution for end users that they enjoy using, that adds value to their job, and ultimately reduces friction with their interaction with the system. And it's that adoption, again, that drives compliance, because if people aren't using the system, you'll never kind of hit your records management goals. So you typically do a content audit. We would sit down with your end users, and you would go through a card sorting exercise with them to figure out how they think about their content, how we would organize it. Ultimately, it's going to drive the navigation and information architecture and taxonomy of the solution. we've been really big on creating these visual taxonomy charts to really kind of be able to see patterns of content and metadata across the solution. It's a great tool that we've been doing over the past couple projects. Those two bits and pieces will feed into our information architecture. We'll create some wireframes to figure out, well, what should that navigation look like, and what's the landing page of each team site. And once we have all that information, we're able to go into configure SharePoint and create that solution for end users for whatever solution it was that you chose, whether it be projects or policies. At this point, we haven't even really tied in any records management piece. We don't want records management influencing how we create our solutions. So at this point, we have hopefully an amazing collaboration solution for end users that they're going to enjoy using. And then we'll go back into Collabware. We'll configure our content rules. We'll add that automation so that every time I'm uploading a contract into the system, that the system automatically places it into the right category and then manages the lifecycle of it. So, we'd go back into SharePoint, we'd upload a contract, and we would see that, in fact, the content ends up into the right record category for general contracts, and then we'll be storing it for 7 years after the contract date. And then the last thing that we do in our QuickStarts is give you some reporting. So being that we've been working with Collabware for 3 or 4 years now, we've come up with a bunch of commoditized reports against the platform that really help you keep on top of the compliance piece going forward. So some examples would be just getting a handle on a weekly basis or a daily basis, how many items are being added to the system, how many records are being declared. If there's a big differential there over between items being added and items not being declared records, you can go investigate that and keep on top of it. Here's another one that shows you a distribution of content over time. Collabware has an element of, or an idea of a potential record, which is a document that we've categorized against our file plan, but actually hasn't been locked down as a record yet. So really the potential records represent the collaboration, ongoing collaboration in the solution. The active records would be the ones that have been locked down. The non-records would be stuff that we've explicitly identified as not being a record, but we've still categorized. So if you're a records manager, we talk about transitory files or convenience files. And then the green bit, the uncategorized documents, that's really the risk in our solution. And so we have a report that lists all of the items without a record category in SharePoint, and you're able to take that back to the departmental team and figure out why it is that we weren't able to categorize this content. And there's kind of an assumption here that we really do want to go through and categorize everything in the system, both our records and our non-records, to keep on top of all of the information hygiene. The idea is that we don't want to keep those Christmas party invite lists from 2007 around for until 2017. We can get rid of those after a year or two. So that's the quick start. So what do you do next after the quick start? Well, I think a lot of people that go through this process, I've done a couple times now, is that you really kind of take a step back. There's a bit of an aha moment where you have a much better understanding of what it's going to entail to roll this out to the organization. You have a much better understanding of the limitations and what this will actually look like in real life. You may want to kind of stop and reflect and go back and maybe update your vision, maybe update your roadmap, think about your effort and planning going forward. And then some people just choose to move on to that next scenario. So if you just tackle policies, maybe you want to move forward and tackle procedures, or you want to tackle contracts or projects, or look at the department. So that's our webinar on.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So there's a bit of time left for questions. So for those of you on the line, there is a chat box within the software for you to be able to submit questions. And what we'll do is we'll take the questions as they come in. If there's more questions than we have time for, we'll certainly get back to everybody individually with their questions. Looks like so one of the first questions to pop in here, Mike, is what if I don't have a file plan yet?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess my question to that would be: do you have someone in the organization who is a records manager? Okay. I think it's pretty important to be successful in these initiatives that you have someone ultimately who owns records management within the organization. If so, most companies do have a file plan. If you don't, that's quite okay. you can certainly build that file plan out as you go. And it's interesting, Scott, because oftentimes what you'll find is that as you understand how Collabware works with a SharePoint, oftentimes you'll go back and refine your file plan anyways. Okay. So most of the people that go through this process and roll out Collabware and SharePoint will oftentimes refine their file plan. So in some ways, it's almost nice to start from scratch, or from not having a file plan, being able to build it out in a meaningful way as you go.
Okay. Question number 2. Can you implement this approach if you do not have SharePoint?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, we're a SharePoint shop. We really kicked off our ECM practice about 4 years ago now, and we surveyed the market, and SharePoint or Microsoft strategically didn't really add in a bunch of records management into the SharePoint platform. We looked at the third-party add-ons and came up with Collabware. So the QuickStart offering that we have is really about adding Collabware to SharePoint. I think the methodology is still valid. I think as long as the platform is a good platform for collaboration and document management and can really suit end-user needs, I think it's probably a good approach. But by any means, it's really the main takeaway is that when you really dive into it and get some experience with the technology you are using, that just really makes all those decisions and process and planning a little bit easier going forward.
Okay, here is another one, Mike. How do you recommend keeping your employee portal and collaboration site separate, but also appropriately connected when it makes sense?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so I think Collabware, it's a philosophy of ours as well, is you really want to have that single source of truth in your platform. So when we talk about what goes into your employee portal, it's really it's the content that you want to surface to your average end user. So policies and procedures and how-do-Is and all that great content that you create. Collabware has a surfacing technology so you're able to surface policies and procedures in the collaboration portal. It doesn't necessarily have to live there. It can live in your collaboration portal and surface in the employee portal. It's an interesting exercise for sure to go through. We obviously only have half an hour here for the webinar, but one thing that may come up is somewhere in between where we have our employee portal, which is a great place to go for policies, procedures, and to engage with the organization and foster culture. The collaboration portal is really this departmental site where people go to kind of work every day as a team and work together. And sometimes what you'll actually find is a bit of an in-between that, frankly, I would simply put into the collaboration portal, but it's what we call a high-value scenario. So, one of our current clients, for example, they have a really hard time getting a handle on their contracts. And so what we're doing with them is we're creating a contracts portal, which really sits with the collaboration portal, but we're surfacing, we're taking all the contracts across the entire implementation, and we're going to surface them in a meaningful way. So that if you need a contract, you can go to the contracts portal and see all the contracts across the entire organization. I think that's one of the things that people tend to struggle with a bit is how do you surface that content? Maybe that doesn't belong in the employee portal, but it's still kind of meaningful for people in a day-to-day role in an organization.
Okay. What is the average time frame for implementation, start to finish?
Yeah, so for a quick start, I'm going to say it's probably 4 to 6 weeks. If really the biggest issue here is your capacity as an organization to work through this. So I'll say the quick start, as long as you can create the team, it's probably 4 to 6 weeks. And at the end of that, Collabware's installed, got your file plan, where there's one solution or 1 or 2 scenarios that's actually in SharePoint that's being managed from Collabware. Okay. We typically go department by department or function by function through an organization, and it obviously depends on the size of that. But I'd say an average department of a dozen people will probably take it between 2 to 4 months, really depending on their availability. So if you have a company of, say, 500 people, you're probably looking at anywhere between 1 year to 2 years worth of effort.
Okay. So 4 to 6 weeks for the first department. 1 year to 2 years.
4 to 6 weeks for the quick start. I don't think you typically tackle an entire department in a quick start. But an average department anywhere from 2 to 4 months.
Okay.
And you'll typically overlap them as well, because what will happen is you'll have a bunch of downtime in between departments. So departments, they have this thing called work to do, or so they say. And so oftentimes just in terms of trying to push the project forward, you'll want to work with 2 or 3 different departments at the same time and kind of push them all at the same time. So.
Okay. And then it looks like one more. Can I get a copy of the presentation?
Yeah, you can. I think if you reach out to me, my email, if I'm in the Habanero website, and give me an email, and I'll forward you the presentation. I believe we also recorded this, and we're going to post this on our website as well, so you'll be able to come back and see the presentation again.
Okay. That looks like it's all the questions. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And should you have any questions or be looking for some further information, Mike's information is up there on the screen right now. And as well, you can find him via our website. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a great day.